everyone for attending. Today's Masterclass Part 2 series is called Ensuring the Quality of Your Traditional and Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Models. We are extremely pleased to have as our presenter today, ModelOp Chief Technology Officer, Jim Olsen.
Thank you. Yeah, and welcome everyone today to the second in this fall series of the Masterclass. And today we're going to be doing very little slideware, just a little bit up front to kind of set the stage. We're going to be showing you more stuff hands-on about how we actually make all this stuff happen. You know, if you missed the first episode, there we go. If you missed the first class, I suggest you watch the video, as it really does provide the overall context of what we're trying to go through in detail over here. But today, we're going to specifically be talking about kind of the idea of what makes up the quality of the models, kind of like things like the use case definition, the assessment of risk, the actual development of the model, and how we actually make sure that it's a well-developed model and all those things. So we'll be talking about more of that. But then next week, we'll actually be doing, again, another more hands-on presentation where we're going to be talking about how you actually get your models ready for production. And then finally, we'll finish out the series with, once they're actually out there and deployed in production, how do we actually monitor the models and eventually retire them? All of this is based on the idea of the SR 11.7 guidelines around managing model risk that has very extensive document, but this summarizes it well. Where we've talked about this last time, where there's a series of different steps. We're going to be concentrating on the define and the develop and validate today. So as a reminder, we have overall the idea of a model lifecycle. Let me jump to things, but where we want to actually concentrate is we're going to look in depth at a couple of these different stages today. So we're going to be looking at basically starting with the idea of a model. So, often when you see these presentations, they start with an actual AI model or a Python model or something like that. When really, when you want to manage model risk, you want to start with the idea of building a model. What are we trying to build? What's the success criteria? What's the risks to the business of just how we're going to use this model? And then we're going to make decisions based on that on there. So we're going to walk through this part in detail first, where we show how you can actually register a model, et cetera, and then actually calculate risk, and then actually get out there to actually develop the model. And then we're going to be concentrating around the develop and validate, where we make sure that the model has basically all of the kind of necessary pieces in order to make it a complete model. And we'll talk about that more as we go through the actual demonstration, as well as then how do we actually get an actual review of the model and help enable that to be an easier process on that. So we'll be walking through that as we go through this process as well, on that kind of things in detail. And just a reminder that as we walk through these model life cycles, they are driving the process, but they're also tracking the process for history, et cetera. So, any model op solution you want really needs to provide these kinds of details and things like that to get there. So with that, we're going to get out of the demoware on that kind of things, and instead jump right into the actual product itself. I'm going to go ahead while I'm doing this and turn off my video, so it's a little easier to follow along and you have some more real estate on your screens there on that. So what we're going to be walking through today is this first part of the model lifecycle with the chevron diagram that we showed you earlier, where what we're going to do is actually we're going to get a use case document that actually describes the model. So it's just a Word document, but we want to register some metadata about the model and start to walk it through the system. Now, we're going to use a simple web page to show you that today, but this can typically come from something you may already have within your system as well, and be actually brought into the ModelOp Center solution that we're showing you here. Because what we want to make sure we do is start, the process early about what are we trying to develop, and we may end up with multiple candidates that actually potentially fulfill this use case document. We're going to show you how you can do that with ModelOp Center, because that's unique, and we're going to show it to you across multiple platforms as well, so that we get to the development phase. So we're going to start out this process and follow along, and I'm going to describe to you what we're doing as we go through each phase of these items and what we're looking for and how we've implemented it within our system. Remember that all these diagrams you're seeing are actually drag and drop and editable within our solution, so you can modify these processes as business dictates, or you need an extra step that ties into one of your proprietary systems or internal systems. For today, we're going to be using Jira a lot as an example of an integration to an enterprise asset that you already have. So people will be doing their work in Jira when it comes to a human task. But these things can also occur within ServiceNow, or maybe you have a proprietary ticketing system or multiple systems that do part of this process. And that's one of the powers of our solution. We can integrate with those, and it's important to do that because you're going to have a lot of players when you come to actually ensuring the quality of your models and managing risk, because there's a lot of different people that will do that. And I'm going to kind of point out when we switch those different personas and use that as we go along in this process. So initially, we're going to start with the idea of just we need to start a model. So we're going to go to, as I said, I have kind of a simple web page that lets us specify the minimum amount of information necessary for defining a model. But again, I want to point out this could actually come from a system such as Archer or an internal system that you may already have. So we're just going to enter some basic information, and we're going to use a German credit risk model that we have that's open source there to actually do this process today. And a description, sure, we can just put that in there, and then we could actually choose to like categorize the model as to what it's actually doing for us and that kind of thing. This is where we can actually attach our use case document. So we already have one written that's basically a Microsoft Word document. We're actually going to bring that into our model inventory and associate that going forward. So we're going to switch back over to here in just a second. And so we're actually going to go ahead and create that submission. And when we do, that's actually going to start out the process. We're going to be able to trace that process through as to where we're at. Any kind of a ModelOp solution, if it's going to really provide the insight you need, it's going to need to make sure that you can see at any point in time where the model is in this life cycle. It's because often things can get hung up. Somebody may need a little nudge to go take a look at something, et cetera. So having that kind of insight is really important. So we can see that, in fact, we're waiting for that risk assessment to actually be complete. So a first stage is, now that we have a use case document, before we even start a model, we need to figure out in the business, what is the risk of this use case to the business, no matter what the implementation? We don't necessarily care. Is there potential bias risk? Is there equity issues? Is there, financial risks and quantifying that? And that really doesn't have anything to do with the implementation yet. So we suggest that as a best practice as your first step. Now, how we do that in our system is we actually go out and we utilize, I said, things like Jira and ServiceNow for those. So rather than the person who's doing this risk assessment actually having to come back to the individual system to actually get this kind of information, we can actually go and do all of that work right in here. Oops, I'm getting the wrong one. I'm in the wrong project. Let's get into the correct project. There we go. So you can see we've actually received the new model registration, and it's actually asking us to review that. So as the persona who's doing that risk, I just work in Jira and I receive this Jira notification, and I can take a look at the use case documents directly attached to the ticket and things like that. And, I can start work, and I do all of my work right in here because I have all the information necessary to do. We'll show you in a minute how all of this is actually tied back to the model in our inventory as well, but we're kind of shuffling between your different enterprise systems and what you actually have there. So we're going to go ahead and actually read that lovely document and actually assign a risk to our business. So we're going to actually say, hey, the risk is actually high to the business. This is making a financial decision doing that. And then I'm actually just going to go ahead and mark my ticket as done. When we do that within ModelOp, we actually are tracking that. So we'll see that that ticket has now been completed and move on in our process to actually drive the flow here and actually go out and say, okay, now we've got a risk assessment. We have a model use case document. Now, hey, a developer needs to actually go build this thing. And that is basically where our system takes an agnostic approach to that. We don't believe that there's necessarily always one platform that satisfies a need for an actual model development issue. So you'll see that basically the model has been designed, and we have the basically use case things, and we need to actually go develop the model. Now we can actually link right into our system to get the information. You'll see things such as the inventory starting to build up all the things. So there's our use case document that we actually already had in place, and now we're actually going to go and use whatever tools we want. We could go off, into a SageMaker, into traditional Python, or even an Excel spreadsheet, and actually develop the model and then associate it with this specific things. I want to just to shortcut a little for you in the interest of time. I want to show you an example of where you can see we actually already have a use case where we've actually implemented 3 different model implementations. One being just a standard Python model, which is what we're going to use here in a minute on that kind of things. Another just being a simple Excel spreadsheet. And yet another potential implementation is a SageMaker model. And your model inventory needs to cross all of these different platforms and bring all that information together for you about how they're actually doing it, and associate them back to that original use case, that original review, and have all that information available so you can see how you do that. Now, for the sake of this, we're just going to present one implementation on that. And we're going to do that by actually just associating a Git implementation with this specific thing. So as the developer, I'm already working that ticket. I've got one, and I've got one that I'm proposing as a solution. I've had some connectivity issues to GitHub today, but we'll give it a try again. I've got a backup server if it doesn't work. So if you see something weird happen there, there's no worries there. Oop, I think to the right window would be helpful. And let me close one of these out here. And we're actually going to go ahead and just add that Git repo, which can be of any format in our particular implementation of ModelOps. So, ModelOps Center allows you to do that. So we're going to track a specific branch on that. And we're just actually going to go ahead and associate our implementation with this use case now to say, hey, here's what I believe is the good solutions. All the experimentation, playing with data, all that stuff has actually already occurred and completed, and that can happen whatever tools that the data scientists want to use, because we believe there's a multiplicity of those in an enterprise environment, but we want a consistent process for ensuring the quality. So now when this actually associates all of these resources, which it did complete, you'll see now there's actually all kinds of things. There's the use case document we originally have, but now we have decision tables. We have the notebook they developed it with. We have the actual Python file. We have a bunch of different data and et cetera that we actually want to have associated. Now, I'm going to talk about this more in just a second as we run through it, but it's really important we have things like the original training data or reference to it. We have, some baseline data, some scored data, some test data, and we want to ensure that's there because we want to monitor these models later on. And if we don't have the training data, how are we going to do drift? So, often when we get to a model review situation, you'll see in this next piece we're going off to here, let me close that one out as well. You'll actually see where, we're waiting for this model to be developed, but often when it goes on to the model risk department to actually review, they haven't provided the training data, or they haven't provided, the schema, or they haven't provided all of these different items on here. And we want to shorten that process, because what happens is then it goes to the model review person. The model review person tries to review it. They don't have the stuff they need to do that because they can't run the tests on it to verify the data and the quality of the data, et cetera. So they have to go back to the developer and wait for the developer to respond. And there's this cyclical back and forth between the model risk management team and the developers, and that goes on forever. So instead, a good model risk management ModelOps solution will actually go through, and we can actually verify any or all of the items we want to make sure are specified on that model, and immediately create a JIRA ticket back to the developer telling them which ones are missing, so they can do that before it even gets to your model risk assessment department, so you're not wasting that time. And more importantly, you can tell the developer exactly what is missing. So we're going to go, when we complete our ticket and say we believe this is complete, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to verify that all of those items are there. So we'll go back to our original development ticket here and actually say, hey, now we're done our development. And then we're going to go on to here, and we'll actually see where it actually goes through. And it actually did verify, and all those items were there. So we just saved model risk management going back to the developer. And then now further, we're going to run standardized tests using that baseline data and that training data and the scored data to basically generate a bunch of statistics. Another thing model risk management team has to spend an enormous amount of time on is actually getting the data, running the stability tests, and all those things we're doing, copying and pasting them into documents, and et cetera. And we wanted our solution to basically accelerate that process. So what we're actually able to do is register standardized tests with our systems. You can register anything you want. We have the idea of monitors, et cetera, so we can use standard calculations, et cetera. And we'll be showing you more of those in the next presentation around the monitors. But for today's, we're actually able to basically use one of these standardized tests with an associated document template that's basically associated with those tests. That's a Word document tagged with fields to put in there. You can specify wherever you want in your boilerplate, and we're going to automatically populate those before we create the JIRA ticket for the actual model risk management review process to actually occur. So this, you can see how this saves a ton of time and is a really important thing to do. So now when, again, switching people, now I'm the model risk management team. I've actually now got this basically JIRA saying I should actually start working on this. Well, now what I can do is I've already got this pre-populated document. Excuse me, I gotta move a window there. There we go. Where I can actually take a look at it, and it's actually already populated with it, the basic information. This is just a very brain dead simple example, so it could be clear. But we've grabbed the model names, its unique ID, its description, etc., who developed it, when. But more importantly, we can have template where it says, please fill this part out now, please. So this is what they go fill. But we've already pre-populated with things like the classification metrics or stability analysis of the different individual features that are actually on there. So they no longer have to go do that work. All of that is there, so they can fill in around it and do the kind of human explanation about what those items are, or even run things like standard bias, looking at things like the protected class of gender. So, I've already got the graph. Now I just have to fill in the rationale behind what I'm seeing in the graph and doing that. And you can imagine that saves a lot of time, but also provides a lot of consistency. These were run automatically for the model risk management team. So we have the exact evidence of what was run. We have the exact job that was run, the exact data that was used, et cetera, and that kind of things. So you really start to create a lineage. So the person doing this risk analysis would just fill in all of this other stuff around that information and re-upload it back to the ticket, and it'll continue on from there. But I do want to point out, when we go look at this model now that we actually have, that we've been working on, we'll see that we actually have the here's our test runs where we have it. We can see our review that's in progress, the exact ticket that's going on there. So as the developer, I know where it is in the process. I can see on that. I can see the actual job that was run, again, providing that kind of end-to-end lineage about where it is. And more importantly, I can see visually where we are in that overall process. So again, I have that insight, because as you can see, this process can go on for a while. But what we're really doing by doing all of this stuff in more of an automated fashion here is ensuring a consistency and quality to the model review process, and saving a lot of time, because I'm getting all that stuff back to me as well. So all these steps really need to occur before we go on any further to even start to think about the productionization of the model. But you can see how we started with a blank template of the model, and we're already slowly building up more and more. We have the actual use case documents. We have all of the items here that we've collected over time, and we're going to continue to be building on that. And, in the next series of classes, we're also going to be talking about the monitoring of the model and adding on to that. So, it becomes very important that we have that full lineage back into the system. And that's really what a ModelOp solution needs to do. But more importantly, it needs to tie into your existing enterprise assets, is what you have, like Jira's and ServiceNow's, and also your development platforms, being things like SageMaker, or a Python notebook, or a simple Excel spreadsheet. It needs to work across all of those in a consistent manner. If it's just tied to one platform, you're going to have holes in what you can do, and you're not going to have the level of view into all the models that are going on with your system. So, just kind of to review overall what we looked at there, and then I'll open up some questions on chat if you have specific items. What we've actually managed to do here is we've collected the idea all the way to the use case, moved it through, let the developer develop how they want it and track it. And then when they're done with one or more proposals, then we can go on and verify the quality of all of those items by making sure all the items we need to monitor the model in the future, as well as do the initial risk analysis. And then we've actually managed to run standardized tests that are consistent, not through the model, but through a separate model that just looks at the data. And then we actually populated the Word document and are collecting the review from the person. So you can see how we've really, in detail, covered that first two steps within that Chevron diagram that we had there to deliver the solution overall on that. So there we go. Start the video again there. Yeah, so I hope that really provided you kind of the idea of that first step of the quality within this first 30 minutes that we're doing today. So now I'm going to take a couple questions. I've got one here. Is it fair to assume that the MRM template is user-defined, or does your solution provide templates? Both, in that we provide some examples of best of class to help you get started. But the templates themselves, I'll switch over here briefly and show, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. We're going to talk more about monitors later, but one concept of a monitor is something that we have. So you can see here where we have an example standardized document template. We manage that just like every other model within the system, because these test models are part of the lineage. We want to make sure we know the exact version that was running at the time. And if you'll see, one of the assets on there is the actual document itself that actually is used and populated. And that's just a standard Word document with some additional basically tags in there that you can say insert test result here, insert the model name here. So you can absolutely make your own and do that, and actually then associate them with any kind of one of our actual monitor tests that we have there. So absolutely, they can be user defined, and you can even have your own specific metrics that may be specific to your business that you can provide as well on that. Was there any other questions that people had? Oh, I see one came up there. Is the model lifecycle different for ML models, given that they are recalibrated frequently and hence require more frequent, almost continuous validation? Again, this will depend on your business and things like that. We look at it as any retraining of a model could potentially go through the MRM process still, where it needs to be revalidated. Now, when it's a revalidation, perhaps it takes a shortcut where it just goes back to the risk assessment to look at it to make sure that the calibrated data sets aren't there. All of these model life cycles that we actually have, you'll see there's a multiplicity of them. They are definable by you. We've had basic templates that we suggest as starting points, and then they can be tweaked. The overall high level, no, it doesn't matter. For instance, that credit risk model was actually an AI, machine learning model. But, as you saw in the earlier demo, we can follow that same process with just something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. So there's definitely a commonality to them. But if you're doing frequent retrainings, you may be able to shortcut and abbreviate some of those processes based on the model risk. So if the risk is high, maybe you always want to go through the full validation, even though they are getting trained frequently. And maybe if they're a low or medium risk, they can be fast tracked because of that. So one of the good things about all of these model life cycles is that they can decision based on those values that were entered. So we can say high risk models, well, they've always got to go through this. Low, well, maybe they can skip these 4 or 5 different steps that we actually have on there, on that kind of thing. So you'll actually have the ability to do that. And extend. These are editable by you. It's standard BPM 2.0 notation, and we provide high-level delegates that actually manage that whole entire process for you on that. I think I see another one. Do you have any off the cuff, the things like that? So basically, overall, you can see we have that ability to modify these. The actual retraining themselves, I do want to point out as well, can be triggered. And we'll talk about that more later because we'll be talking about in the next session how we monitor models once they are in production. And when you have those going on, we can trigger that, hey, this model's looking bad, somebody needs to take a look at it. So we have that as well on that kind of things. And then additionally, there's a question here around basically the integrations with different different systems. I do want to point out that one of the powers of using the BPMN 2.0 notations is we can easily change out. So for instance, we're using Jira now, but we started the process with our own internal web page. We do have that ability to replace that with like an automated import from an existing system within yours. So if your system speaks standard REST or SOAP or any of those kinds of things, they can be drag and dropped and brought into these flows to gather additional data. Because often what we find is within an enterprise, portions of these basically malware processes you may already have within your organization. So, it's not unusual when in the ModelOp solution, one of the powers we actually had here is that ability to actually go out and pull information from those disparate systems you may already have and act as the glue or the conductor of the orchestra that pulls that together. So you don't have to use our systems for every ounce of that information. We can actually pull that information into our system and reference it. So we have the centralized inventory, but we actually gather that information from different places that already exist within your organization. So that's definitely a capability of our product as well on that kind of things on that. So I am not seeing any other questions, and we're just about out of time here. If there's any last questions, go ahead and get them posted. But I do want to thank you for your time today and remind you that 1 week from today, the same time, we will have have the next in the series where we'll be diving into that process of how do we actually look at things like we'll be going further down the line of like the security risk of the actual code to the system. How do we validate in a parallel environment? How do we review this information across all those things and et cetera to roll it up and bring that information together? Because that's kind of the next step is we've talked about the risks to the business in this first one and covering areas of that, of some more auditability. But now we actually want to look at the actual model risks that can be there from the perspective of security violations, consistency. Does this thing work? And then how do we make sure it continues working? So we'll be diving deeper on those sections. And again, this will be a hands-on demo next time as well with just a few slides. So I really encourage you to join and see that. And if you haven't seen the first masterclass, I really encourage you to watch that recording as well.